Global Conservation Corps presents the Rhino Man podcast. I'm John Jerko, your host, and one of the directors of Rhino Man the movie. This podcast series is a way for me to interview top conservationists on the topics of rhinos, the poaching crisis, the importance of rangers, and community engagement, all as a way to create awareness around these issues and to promote the coming release of our documentary film. In this episode, I'm talking with Boris Vos. Boris was with the Ministry of Defense in the Netherlands from 1996 to 2014, before moving to project-based conservation training in Asia and Africa. He's the co-founder and director of operations at Ranger Campus and lead operations for the Lead Ranger program, a collaborative initiative of the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, the Thin Green Line Foundation, and Ranger Campus. In this capacity, Boris has trained rangers in Africa to be instructors and leaders in their own protected areas. In this conversation, we talk about Boris's decision to go into the military, his path to becoming a trainer, and many of the details of what makes a good trainer. We also dive into his first trip to Africa while protecting the coast from Somali pirates, and how seeing a poached elephant inspired him to change his career and go into conservation. We go in depth into the importance of rangers, how he and his wife Dominique started Ranger Campus, and the evolution and mission of Lead Ranger. This was a fun chat full of stories, depth, and wisdom. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Boris Vos. All right, Boris, welcome to the Rhino Man podcast. It's really an honor to have you on here.
Thank you, John, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. To get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're currently doing, and what the organization is that you're working with?
Yeah, so I came into conservation, I think, proper in 2013. I'm a bit of a walking cliche. I spent most of my previous professional career in the military. Ended up in conservation, and after meandering around and learning a lot very quickly, ended up with Lead Ranger, which is a program that we are currently running and expanding. Yeah, working out of Kenya, and I live there together with my wife, Dominique. That's it in a nutshell for now. Yeah.
What's the mission statement of Lead Ranger? We're going to get way more into the weeds with it, but before we jump into your past a little bit, what's kind of the overview? What are you guys doing?
I'd like to give you the informal mission statement of Lead, and that is to make ourselves obsolete in the next 15 years. We're actually already a few years in, but it really lies at the foundation of the choices that we make as we are growing this program. So that's a really important one, I think.
Mm-hmm. And essentially, you're training Ranger trainers so that they can go back and train their teams or other people in their communities with these skills that you're training them with.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When you talk about trainer, it can be a lot of things. But for us, what we like to do is we like to take rangers who are experienced, but don't necessarily had, either formal schooling or don't have had any sort of instructor training, and take them and turn them into weapons for their organization, in the sense that we want to give them the skills to, take their experience and build that into deliverables for their colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm really excited to kind of dig into that even more. I've had Ruben Takak on this podcast, which he's a big part of the film, and he's talked about it a little bit. And it's something he's been really excited about when I first heard that he came over to work with you guys. So yeah, excited to get into that. Before we go too deep into it though, can we just start with where you grew up? How did you get into all this? Was it the military first? Was conservation ever a thought in your mind early on? How did this journey all start?
Well, I grew up in the Netherlands, in a place called Wageningen, which is a nice sort of green town of about 50,000 people in the middle of the Netherlands. We have a large university here. We always have had lots of nationalities in our humble little town. I think the latest count was about 150 nationalities actually that sort of come in and out. And this university is internationally recognized as a place to learn about conservation. Now, I have to tell you, I'm not an academic, right? This is where I grew up. And after my school, I didn't necessarily enjoy school a lot. I like to be outside, and you know what it can be like when you're a bit younger. You don't necessarily see the relevance of everything that's being taught, and if you're energetic, you want to be outside. And so I was glad when that was done, and I thought I joined the military, which at the time was still, conscript army in the Netherlands. I think this was applauded by most of my teachers because I think they thought that discipline was something that I definitely needed. So off I went.
So was it something that you were attracted to, though? As did you want to go there? I mean, you said it was conscript at the time, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as a conscript in the Netherlands at that time, which was 94, you had a couple of choices as a conscript. And one of them you could just become a conscript, be sent wherever you were needed, or you could volunteer for instance, the special forces in the Netherlands, which I didn't do, or you could volunteer for deployment on the UN to Bosnia, which to me sounded very exotic. And I was definitely very keen to become a bit more exotic than a bit more windswept. So I opted up for that. And after 2 months of training, they booted me there. And that was sort of really the start of it. This was a time where, a lot of stuff was going on in Bosnia. I was with the regular army, and I was posted to Sarajevo. And that was also the time where the city was under siege, and the multinational brigade intervened in that. And part of that was the Dutch Marines, the Royal Netherlands Marine Corps. That was even more exotic and even more windswept than what I was doing. But I had glasses at the time, and pretty severe ones. So that was no option. Fortunately, at the time, 1995, it was experimental that they brought in the lasering of the eyes, right? So I took the money that I earned on that deployment, had my eyes lasered, and lo and behold, the Marine Corps wanted me. So that's what I started doing. And I did that for a good portion all the way up to 2014. In hindsight, why did I choose the Marine Corps? I'm not entirely sure, because I don't really like being on the water. And, Marine Corps worldwide are known for their capability on the border of land and water, right? So I was always happy when I was on land, not on the water. And sort of dove into that. Became an instructor very early on. And throughout my career, that started developing. So I started as a military ski instructor, would you believe it? And then, which was interesting because I learned to ski in the Marine Corps.
I was going to say, are there a lot of slopes in the Netherlands? I'm not super familiar, but
no. But we used to, which is actually now current again. We used to do the northern flank of Europe.
Okay.
So every year we would spend 3 months in the winter up above the polar circle in Norway on the border with Finland. So yeah, there was a bit of skiing there. In Holland, there's not really a lot to do in that sense. Yeah, and then, did my stint, started specializing a bit more. And then at some point made it to become a sniper instructor, a jungle warfare instructor, a tracking instructor. Now, these are very land-based skills. And these are skills that all of them, the thing that unites those three is that you are in nature, you learn to work with nature, you learn to read the ground, you learn to read your surroundings, you start tuning in very, very much in detail about what's going on around you. And I love that. I absolutely love that, and it was such a wonderful job to be able to do. And I went to some, to Middle America, South America for jungles, West Africa, Asia. There's quite a few jungles that I trotted around with my mates, and absolutely delightful. So I think the sort of the love for conservation or for nature really started when I started doing these jobs. And then fast forward to, I think it was 2012, and we were, at the time, I don't know if you're aware of this or listeners are aware of this, but on the east coast of Africa, there was a big piracy problem, right? So, and it was a time where a lot of ships were hijacked. They were parked in the territorial waters of Somalia, and then sometimes for years until the shipping company came to an agreement with the pirates for the ransom, and then they were released. And both NATO and the EU were sending out missions, and we were part of that. So they put us on a naval ship, obviously, back on the sea, not really my favorite, but a really good mission. And I was the sniper team commander on that specific one. Very easy. It's just two of us.
Yeah.
and we were supporting a boarding team. So in case of a hijacked ship, we would cover their approaches if they would free the ship.
I imagine that adds a whole another level of concentration when you've got waves involved in your, when you're putting a scope on someone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also, we were trained from the helicopter or from the ship or things like that. So, but again, the technical skill of long range precision shooting is something that I always very much enjoyed. You've got to be really sort of in the moment and to be able to do that well and stay calm, because your decisions can have, big consequences. So I really enjoyed that. And at some point, the ship had to load supplies. So we went to Mombasa Harbor. I'd never been to East Africa before that. The ship was there for a couple of days. And we obviously, after a day, we had our kits squared away, all our debriefs done and everything. So we were free to go. So we hired a little van with a driver, jumped in and went into Tsavo East. Tsavo East is a massive, massive protected area, absolutely beautiful. I think there's a Netflix series on it, an episode, the one that is hosted by Barack Obama. I think it's called Our National Parks, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. One of them is about Tsavo East, very iconic. And if you drive around and you see groups of elephants of a couple of hundred, right, cruising around, it puts you in a completely different space. And I was absolutely blown away by it. I think that feeling that you are not necessarily at the top of the food chain, but you're part of an ecosystem instead of on the sideline of it. I found that very appealing, absolutely stunning. But then, one of the next mornings we were driving around, there was an elephant that was just shot. A bunch of rangers standing around. One of the tusks was removed by the ones that did it. And the rangers were about ready to follow up. This was the Kenya Wildlife Service.
So you arrived pretty recently after the rangers had gotten there?
Yeah, they're still forming up. Now, obviously, we weren't adding a lot to that thing, so we try to sort of, but we were also very curious. So, I had a chat with the guys, very friendly, but also had a bit of time to spend with that elephant. And, I'm not overly sentimental with animals, but, things have its cycle. But the juxtaposition of seeing these giant groups of elephant and then one killed for a few bucks, it got to me. And it wasn't super evident in the moment, but it stuck with me. I think I stuck around the Marine Corps another year and a few months. I had a good career. I could sort of ride it out to the end, and I had a couple of really nice jobs lined up. But I handed in my resignation. And they said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I have no clue. But this is something that I, want to involve myself in." So
So you knew you wanted to do something to help. You just didn't know where you were going to start at that point.
I didn't even know the problem. I'd seen one dead elephant, right?
Yeah.
And so what I did was I sort of went to conservation organizations and I said, okay, this is my background. These are the things that I can do, but, you can take me along. I'll do it for free. I'll volunteer. But I also want to start understanding that problem. And I was very fortunate that a couple of organizations said, yeah, sure, we can use an extra hand. So I went to Sri Lanka in Thailand, went to Belize, went to Tanzania, went to Kenya again. And these are all like, training interventions, right? Organizations doing training. And that was really interesting because I really got to meet the rangers for the first time. And to this day, we're a couple of years in now, but to this day, I still have to meet a ranger that doesn't like training, right? And they're a very motivated bunch, definitely considering the conditions they're in, and doing when you look at it in detail, a very complex job.
Yeah.
Right. So, but then, I did notice one thing because, I noticed a couple of things, but the important one that I noticed from that, and that was really, that led to the birth of what ultimately became Lead Ranger, is that, the training that I was part of was done by expats like myself. People from the outside that get flown in for, pretty high salaries. I was volunteering, but it was part of a team where people were getting pretty good salaries. Not what you get on the security circuit, but, decent. And to give you an example, one of the places we went to, we were going to train 24 rangers for 8 days. which required a team to fly in, hotels, everything, and then going there. And then what happens when you arrive? You got 8 days, 24 guys. You want to pump in as much as you can, right? So you arrive, you say, hello, this is us. You don't even have time for them to introduce themselves. And you go, okay, half a day of patrol formations, half a day actions on, half a day vehicle checkpoints, half a day arrest, half a day tracking, half a day first aid, bam, 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 bam. And then after 8 days, you make a picture with the banner of the donor organization, all the thumbs up, and you walk away. And then halfway as you're walking away, you look around and you think how much of what we brought is actually going to change the way they operate.
Yeah.
And the answer at that moment was little to none. And that was really sort of, okay, the intent is there, right? The need is there. That was obvious. But how can this be done better?
Yeah, and I feel like, I don't know the topic super well, but I feel like within the community in the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years, there's definitely been a lot of pushback to that style of, come in, well-paid, highly trained military from the outside, have these quick training sessions, and then they disappear. I feel like there's been a lot of pushback to that. So it's interesting that that's one of the things that you noticed that needed to change or you didn't feel good about.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about in that sense, I suppose. But, I think there is a time and place for short courses. And I'll give you an example. Like in Kenya, there's a gentleman that's called Odino Martin. He's been with us a couple of times, and he teaches rangers about vulture poisoning, right? Which is a result of often retaliatory poisoning of cattle carcasses to kill the lions that killed it, right? And then with that, the whole chain of the cleanup crew also gets affected, if you will. So the vultures and the hyenas and things like that. So he teaches a very specific, small niche subject in about 3 days. And I think that's a great way to do it. But you got to be, and I feel I can say that from my military background, you have to be very careful in bringing military training into conservation if it is not properly connected to the legality and the mandate of that specific unit that you're training. And to give you an example, so one of the things that rangers do is what we call static interdiction, which is often called, euphemistically, is called an ambush. Now, an ambush in the military has a purpose, right? It is from a concealed position. You are destroying an enemy, right, that walks into your area. And that's why the center area of your ambush is called the killing area. It's literally called the killing area, right? And the cutoff groups on the outside. Now, if you teach someone a tactic like that, what happens is let's say this would happen in Kenya, right? So now these rangers are lined up. They're waiting for someone to walk in because they had intel. Now these suspects arrive, and the response by the rangers is by opening fire on them because they see firearms, right? So now this concludes, however it concludes, and it goes to court. And the judge will say, definitely a judge who knows what they do, and they will say, look, okay, sure, these guys were trespassing. Sure, they were carrying an illegal weapon, probably with the intent to poach an animal. However, you did not identify yourself as rangers, you opened fire. So, which means that for the other guys, the right to self-defense kicks in, right? So they actually have the right to defend themselves. So if you shoot someone, you can go to jail for murder. So if you come in like myself with a military background, with all the best of intentions, you put what you know into this unit, you're setting it up to fail, right? And that is just sort of, leading into what you were saying in regards to, that pushback. It is that the South Africans call it fly-by-nights, right? It's people that come in, and you probably heard that during some of your chats or something similar. And it's people that come in just temporarily, on a volunteer job and miss that point. Right. And then so now you're not helping the rangers. You're setting them up to fail. And that can go with a lot of things, right? Yeah. So I understand that pushback that you're talking about. And I think it is a result of some things that went wrong in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like you're saying, I mean, it's the relationship side, the relationship building side that takes time, whether that's getting to understand the location and the laws there and, what people are actually trying to achieve, and also just getting to know the people that you're training and what their needs are and what they are as humans outside of just the work too, and their connection to their communities and
Yeah, yeah.
their careers and what they're trying to do. So you can't do that if you just show up with no context and throw some training down and get out. And yeah, like you said, I think most of these people have good intentions and are trying to do something good and fulfill a higher
Mm.
purpose in some way. But if you miss those points, then you could definitely do more harm than good.
Maybe if you allow me another example, that might be interesting if, people are listening in who are actually from a military background and think about doing something like this. To give you an example, like it's really important to be empathetic to your students. And that doesn't mean that, you have to feel what they feel. That's not really what I mean by that. What I mean by that is understanding where they're coming from. Like if you look at, for instance, sort of the East African context, those rangers that went to school all went to, or a lot of them went to some form of boarding school system, right? Which is very often in the rural areas, it is a version of boarding school. You go somewhere, you're there, and with the teachers, all boys, all girls.
Away from home kind of thing, right?
Away from home, yeah. And, when we do our lessons and we talk about instruction, we play this game called The Good and the Bad and ask them all to close their eyes. And I say, look, think about the best teacher or the best instructor or the best mentor you ever had. And then when everybody thought of someone, I'll say, okay, tell me why. And I'll write down those characteristics, right? But I'll also do the same for the bad. And then what you hear is physical abuse, sexual abuse, alcoholism, incredibly unsafe. Physical abuse is without exception. Everybody gets beaten. Line up in the morning, get a question, put your hands out, get a question wrong, twap, you get hammered. Now, what does that do? It creates a certain, survival mechanism in your learning environment, right? You're not going to challenge what is being told. You're not going to ask questions because you're not going to stand out. You're going to have great memory. If you remember it right, you will not be punished, right? You'll be very good at copying things, because, it saves you from getting a hiding, right? So then here comes the military trainer, right, with a background in the military, direct way of instruction, right, the way the military does it. And let's say you're teaching them a certain drill of sorts. And you will find that very quickly, by copying what you do, they'll nail it, right? And after 2 hours, it looks absolutely great, right? You're teaching a contact drill. The thing looks amazing, right? You put it on the video and you go, man, this is really good. But then what happens in the field, right? One variable changes or something changes and it collapses because you haven't explored the decision-making part of that drill, which is the most important bit. So that's where it's so important, and this is what ties into what you were saying, is that you get to know them. You need to build trust, and you need and mostly on the trust that you have a safe learning environment, right? Asking questions is good. Making mistakes is even better. Make as many as you want. Laugh about the mistakes, right? Make it fun, because then what happens is people suddenly say, oh, I want to try that. And then it goes wrong. And then they go, that went really wrong. And then you talk about it and then you try it again, right? It becomes a completely different thing in that way.
How do you crack that nut or like break that shell open at first in that type of situation? Because like you said, most people are going to be very hesitant to kind of step out of the bounds of just maybe pure rote copying. I think once things get going, then, you can have these examples and experiences, but what's that first step like? That just seems like a really interesting topic. And I feel like it's probably not just, Kenya or East Africa. I feel like a lot of other areas have similar issues kind of breaking that barrier.
In the beginning, we didn't break it. And that's why we learned it, right? In the beginning, we thought we did a good job, but we didn't. And then once we started learning that this was a mechanism that we needed to deal with, in the beginning, it took us 4 or 5 days to get to that point. Now it's generally within a day. And the reason why is because, first of all, my trainers that I have now are all Africans, former Rangers. Right? Especially my core of three, they're amazing guys. Jackson from Rwanda, Paulo from Malawi, Kizito from Uganda. These are all ex-Rangers. So that already equals the playing field. I think if you would ask the guys, Jackson would be probably the one that would say, look, we are not forcing them to learn. We invite them to learn with us. And what does that look like? It is not creating a difference between instructors and students, right? You've got to get rid of that sort of power thing, which sometimes may develop. Second of all, it is how you deal with questions and it is how you deal with mistakes that sets the tone straight away, right? So you got to lead by example in that. And then there is certain training methods, teaching methods that work really well. There's a thing called reality-based training, which works incredibly well, which is a thing where once the basic skills are done, you throw people into complex scenarios straight away, bang, like medical scenarios, polytrauma, immediately. And then when you see that your student is struggling or they hit a goofy loop, they keep trying the same thing, hoping for a different outcome, or they just completely freeze up. That's when, as an instructor, you say, okay, freeze. I can see your stress. What's going on? Oh, I have no idea what to do. Okay. What do you know? Well, I do know that the scene is safe. Okay. So what do you think your next step should be? Yeah, I remember now. Okay, remember, next time when you hit this, take a breath, think, and continue. Okay. Are you ready to continue? Yes, I am. Okay, go. And then the scenario starts. So you become that voice that you want these guys and girls to have in their head, right? And it's very contrary to how I was taught back in the days, because I would have an instructor screaming at me, what are you doing? He's dying. But what's happening is he's adding stress that's not real stress. It's instructor stress. It's not task-oriented stress, right?
Yeah, it's more imagining like how am I looking in that person's eyes versus what am I attending to?
100% spot on. Yeah. So these are all these sort of a combination of all these things, rewarding questions and sort of things like that allow people to relax and sort of open up, which is really cool. Yeah. Very cool process.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems counterintuitive to throw someone into something that might be a little bit too much for them, but I feel like that offers the opportunity to then break the pattern where someone gets stuck and you have a better chance of, putting someone in a situation where you realize that they don't maybe understand a step, and then you can then explain it to them, because I think that's what you're saying early on. People would copy something really quickly, but they didn't really understand all of the reasons they're doing things. So that way, when a parameter changes, they don't know how to adapt to it because they didn't know why they were really doing it in the first place.
Yeah, and it brings that context of realism to it, because like if you go to primary school in Maungu, the town which is close by, right? You walk past and you hear the teacher go, bap, bap, bap. The kids go, wah, wah, wah. And they can give you the table of 8, but they can't yet multiply, right, at that level. So what you want to avoid, and that's something you got to be keen on the whole time, is that you avoid it becoming an A, B, C, D, E, right? The why is incredibly important. The so what is incredibly important. And actually, what if it all goes tits up? What do you do, right? So you have to work with them to break that. And generally, the Rangers, they absolutely love it. They love it to be able to just make mistakes, explore things. Can I try this? Yeah, give it a try. Let's see what happens. Oh, that didn't go well, did it? No. That went completely bad. So yeah, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I'm sure that's like a pretty cool transition or transformation to see too, when people kind of get that all of a sudden, and then their attitude changes towards it.
100%, and you can physically see that flick.
Yeah. I feel like I might be jumping around a little bit, but going back to your military days, what was it that attracted you to the training side of it and becoming a trainer and focusing on that?
That's a very good question. Well, without going into my youth too much, it was in the beginning, for me, it was important to show people that I knew that I was good at my job. That's how it started when I was still a younger lad, right? I wanted to show people, that I'm good at my job, and sort of the feedback that I got from it, that was really important to me. I was also a pretty bad instructor at the time, looking back, but it's these inevitable stepping stones that you need to take. But then, over time that changed, and it coincided with the time with the Netherlands Marine Corps that we started going out more on missions again. So there was a reality side to it. Now, sharing that experience and preparing people for the real world, and being able to come back from it physically but also psychologically as unharmed as possible, if that makes sense, that really became something that I enjoyed. And then also finding out these little tricks that work really well, and metaphors and little methods and little games that you can do to get them around, and especially those students that were struggling with certain things. That's always what I enjoyed most, to get them to actually excel.
Do you remember when there was that shift, though, from being more interested in showing that you knew this stuff, or maybe it was more about yourself, to when it actually became more about serving the other people involved in the training? Because it sounds like, from what you're saying, there was kind of that early stage, and then at some point you shifted. Do you think when it was the reality of these men are actually going out to battle, and that weighed on you at some point, or just out of curiosity, just gradual?
No, that was personal development, breaking with old patterns, and that was a process that, for the majority, took place outside of the military in my personal life, which then directly impacted, obviously, my professional life as well. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I think this is maybe like a side note, but kind of doing a little bit of research for this video, I saw the UF Pro videos that you did about tracking, and those are kind of like a masterclass in marketing right there, I feel like, because they're just so amazingly well done, and the content that they're providing too is really amazing. I've never used any of their products, so I have no connection or anything. This is the first time I ever even heard of them. But in that, just seeing you speaking and doing the training, I don't know how many takes there were, but and listening to you talk in some other contexts, and also knowing someone like Ruben and some of these other trainers that maybe had military background and also just amazing trainers, do you feel like there's something that going through this process of becoming a trainer does to create a certain confidence or ability to speak well under pressure or something like that? It's something interesting, because I feel like Ruben's another person who you throw on camera and all of a sudden it's like, he's an actor in a movie almost, just because he's so confident in what he's doing and saying. And I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with this, but I think, part of it, I'm guessing, is what you say has to be clear and precise as a trainer. Otherwise, if there's confusion, this could be life or death for certain people. So I'm just curious, as someone that's developed this over the years, what did you have to do, or how did that come about to become that person that's able to convey information in a way that's very concise and direct?
That's a very good question. I think in that sense, the military, in my case, the Marine Corps, has been a great environment to learn that, because at a very young age, as a junior instructor, you will be put in front of a group of people, some of them experienced for 20 years or more, right? Ranks higher than yours. And they understand your role in this. They understand that you are a junior instructor and that you are up and coming, the next generation of instructors. And they know your lesson's not going to be perfect, but they're going to do what you teach them. As long as you're not an idiot and you don't think that you're actually awesome, because then they'll be short.
They'll let you know that you're not.
Yeah. But also they will let you know if they think your lesson is shit, and they will tell you why it is shit. But they'll give you the opportunity to do it, which is a wonderful environment to actually grow as an instructor, right? And it's very direct in the feedback, but it's also very forgiving, as long as you don't make certain types of mistakes, safety mistakes, or if you start treating people like you're God's gift to the Marine Corps, then it's very short-lived. But it's a great environment to to learn these skills. And I think over time you start appreciating the benefit of precision of words or wording or metaphors in order to get a point across. And that's also something that you will learn over time. I think I'm sort of now at about 22 years as an instructor, on and off. So it's just an accumulation of, of that. And also seeing some amazing instructors at work where you are the students, like, holy cow, how did this is amazing. And then you start thinking, why is it amazing? And then you give it a try, and so, yeah, you're always sort of trying to grow. Yeah. I don't know if this answers your question, but I think this is sort of where it sits.
It's just interesting to me, as someone that I feel like I'm a person that grew up very shy. I'm not the greatest at speaking in front of a bunch of people. So it's always, when I see, especially someone training in that type of context, because there is, say you were in the Marines, it sounds like a lot of those soldiers kind of gave you the respect of like, hey, okay, this was kind of shitty, but we'll give you feedback to make yourself better. But you could be in a context where the students just totally take over, and if you're not on top of your game or don't know what you're doing or aren't able to communicate, you could really lose the group pretty quickly, and it could turn on you in a really bad situation. So it's just an interesting topic, and kind of looking at how you've developed that. And I think from what you're saying, a big part of it is probably the amount of repetitions you've had, and then getting that feedback from whether people telling you how you're doing or seeing how people are either changing or not, or getting it or not, and then doing that enough times that I think that repetition is probably the biggest part of it.
And now that you mentioned that, I think it's also the diversity of your students, right? Because I had that instructor role, but I've taught foreign militaries as well. I've taught law enforcement, civilians, but especially different cultures and things like that. This was even before I went into conservation, training the ICDC in Iraq and the ANA in Afghanistan as part of an operational mentoring and liaison team. It really challenges you as a trainer, as an instructor, to get it right. And yeah, and I think it's sort of leading into something, because that's the thing. You cannot build an instructor overnight. I think that is the big sort of underscore here, and that is actually one of the sort of founding principles of Lead Ranger, is to stick around with people long enough for them to grow and to start putting that repetition in. And then when they are ready, you take them to the next step. Great example, Constance Mwanda from Wildlife Works in Kenya. She started out, she was one of our first students on the Coach Ranger Lifesaver course that we did in Kenya. This was in 2017, right? And when she was teaching, you could barely hear what she was saying because she was quite shy, and then as a woman in a peer group of men, that's even, can be quite intimidating, quite challenging. And she's now the head of training for Wildlife Works, right? So we're a couple of years down the line, and she now runs the training team, and she does an absolutely stellar job. And that, to me, that's our exit strategy. If we do enough of those, then we can say, okay, we're obsolete. Yeah. Let's get the hell out of here. Let's lie in a hammock and drink a beer and something like that.
Yeah, so maybe we could get back on track a little bit. You had that trip to Kenya. You left the military. You were, you went around with some of these different organizations, kind of seeing what they were doing, helping out, volunteering. When did you decide to start your own thing? And I think that Ranger Campus, is that your first organization that you put together? How did that all come about?
That was 2016 when we started that, 2015, 2016. It's a typical Mongo, my own NGO. And it was about the time, or actually, no, about 2 years prior, I met my now my wife, Dominique. She just came back from Malawi, where she was conservation manager in Kasungu National Park. And she was working for the IUCN at the time, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And we met Friday the 13th when Netherlands was playing Spain. I think it was for the World Cup. I was wearing a kilt, and I was standing in the bar, and I do remember I had a few too many drinks, and she came up to me, we had a chat, and we got on like a house on fire. And very quickly, we also started talking about rangers, about ranger training, and about her observations from her position and from mine. And we sort of, we hooked up, and about a year and a half later, we started Ranger Campus. It has the word ranger and campus in it. It's all about training and study and growth and development, but definitely a Mongo. So we tried our best to sort of getting projects off the ground, and it happened, and it sort of slowly developed. We did some work on developing e-learning modules. We thought that was a very cheap and scalable way of getting knowledge out there. And then, that was sort of 2016. And it took us to Kenya a few times, to Wildlife Works, actually. And we sort of, first for 4 weeks, then for 3 months, then for 6 months, and sort of a bit like termites, once you stick your head up, you always come back to the thing. Then I think it was the end of 2016. I might muddle up the dates, but there was a big congress in Hawaii, the World Conservation Congress, organized by the IUCN, and Dominique had to go there for work because she still was doing that at the time as well. I found a cheap ticket. I nominated myself as the suitcase bearer and had the opportunity to come along, which was awesome.
Yeah, Hawaii doesn't sound like a bad place to go.
I'll tell you what, on the back of the Congress, which was on Oahu, I hope I pronounced it correctly, but we went to Kauai afterwards for a couple of days, and I've never, ever seen a place like that in my life. That is like the first night we ended up on the beach on the North Shore, and the sundown was spectacular. Behind us, rainforest and rainbows, and it was like the gods were showing off, look what we can do. And it was just, mind-blowing. Yeah, no, it is. And on that Congress, we ran into Sean, who we hadn't met before, Sean Wilmore, right? And we were sitting at a table having coffee in this big conference hall, and he was walking in the distance. And I said, Tom, that's Sean Wilmore. She said, yeah. So I said, John. So he saw us, so he came over. He probably thought, who are these Muppets? And we sat down and we introduced ourselves. So, look, Sean, we know about your work with the Thin Green Line, very well-known, not-for-profit, big heart for rangers. And we got to talking. And after about 15 minutes trying to explain what we wanted to do, he said, I'll tell you what, the instructor development stuff and the leadership stuff that you guys want to do, we want to do it as well. But so you just started, you have no funding base whatsoever to pull this off. We have the funding together with IAPF, with the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, Damien Manda. We have the funding, but we don't have anyone to do it. Would you guys like to do it? And I sort of looked at Dom, and she was sort of giving me a gentle kick under the table. And we sealed the deal right there and then. And he got on the phone with Damien. He said, okay, we found our guys to do it. Damien said, all right.
Let's go.
It was like that. Yeah. And then we may have found a bottle of vodka somewhere and sort of celebrated the occasion, which ended up in a solo synchronized swimming contest in Waikiki Beach at 12 at night, which Sean won. I still need to have a rematch. Sean, if you're listening to this, I still need that rematch. I lost because I switched.
Yeah, it seems like that water just always keeps coming back to haunt you.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, man. And then we just started getting going. That was it. We just got it up. We just started.
What year was this again when you guys formally did this?
Yeah, this was, I think we kicked it off in 2017.
Yeah, I mean, Sean's just one of those people too that's as soon as you start talking to him, you just realize his passion and love for Rangers, and just he's just a great human.
100%. He will always, he will walk into a room, and it doesn't matter how many big wigs are there. If there's a ranger standing somewhere, he'll go straight to that ranger first. He's that guy. So I got a lot of time for Sean.
So you guys kicked it off. What were some of the beginnings like for you? How did you get started? What were some of your first training programs? How did this thing take off?
Well, we first had to find a home for this. So after cruising around a little bit, it was the people at Wildlife Works in Kenya that said, well, if you want to run it somewhere, why not run it here? And it's an absolutely beautiful spot. It's right between Savo East and Savo West. So I sort of came back to where it all started, right? It's a bit of a circle. Yeah, Dom and I both packed our bags and we went there, we moved there. There was a house that we could occupy in the bush. Yeah, how do you get started with something like that? I think we started developing this thing which is called Ranger Lifesaver, which is a very pragmatic set of skills to deal with trauma in the field, right? And it's all non-invasive medicine. So we're not sticking needles into people and things like that. It's something that anybody can learn, right? With the right equipment. So from the beginning, we said, look, if we teach this, we want to teach someone to teach it back to their peers. So instead of training an organization, we train a selected few of that organization. We provide them with all the training materials, and we provide them with the operational kit to take back, and then they can start implementing it. And that's how it started. It's a program that we're still running, and it still has a great impact. The course is 4 weeks, 2 weeks technical and 2 weeks instructional. It's very much Bob Ross. I don't know if you remember Bob Ross.
The painter? Yeah. The happy trees.
The Zen
exactly.
Master Slend painter on TV, exactly. The happy trees. Yeah. And so it's the same with this. We very much tell them, okay, if you want to teach the cat tourniquet, this is how you teach it, right? This is the methodology that you're going to use. This is how you teach that. This is how wound packing, airway maneuvers. Because with the idea that people need to get hours under their belt as beginning instructors, right? And over time, they will develop their own style and they will develop their own personality as a trainer. In the beginning, it's, Bob Ross, I do it like that, you do it like that. And I think to this date, we now have graduated around 290 people who have trained thousands. And we have, the things that sort of stand out for me is and this happened just the other day at Big Life Foundation in Kenya. There's a couple of really good coaches, Ranger Lifesaver, running around with Big Life. And they had trained their own people, right? And one of the people that they trained was Sergeant Sinkoy. And Sergeant Sinkoy is a proper Maasai, like old school Maasai. He doesn't even, he only speaks Ma, which is the Maasai language. He doesn't even speak Swahili or English, right? This is someone completely out of reach for us directly, right? Now, Sinkoy was on his way home from work on his motorbike, and he sees a consternation in one of the communities. And there's a woman laying on the ground, gravely injured because an elephant attacked her, right? And the community had given up on her. One of her legs, and not too descriptive, but severe bleeding on one of the legs. The elephant had picked her up and dragged her around and done all that. So Sinkoy got off his bike, improvised a tourniquet to stop that bleeding, protected the woman from hypothermia, improvised, called a vehicle, got the proper kit, changed improvised for real materials, organized the evacuation. Woman made it to the hospital alive. And obviously her leg was in such a state, she's keeping the leg, but she will have difficulty walking for the rest of her life, but she's back in the community, right? That impact that a ranger provides, that such a service to a community member, can't be overstated, because it is an alternative narrative to the old, your elephants are eating my maize, right? Now suddenly you're there for them, for the community members. And some of the things that we hear coming back from these instances, the sort of the anecdotal information we're getting back is things like, the information position improves in the community, contested areas become less contested, even less escalation of use of force because rangers are deemed more professional, less escalation during human wildlife conflict when the rangers attend. So there's, and these are all great outcomes. So as you can hear, I'm quite passionate about this part of what the Coach Ranger Lifesaver does. But aside from the Ranger Lifesaver skill, it is also the entry-level instructor course. So once you're a Coach Ranger Lifesaver, you start impacting your unit, your community. Once you have enough hours under your belt, that's when we pick you up again. And then we'll say, all right, let's come back in. Let's take you to the next level of instruction, right? It's no longer paint by numbers. We'd like you to teach this. All right, give it a go. How would you do it, right? So we start building people up. We stick with them over time. We stick with organizations over time. And that is, I think, part of the success of Lead Ranger, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think we should probably dive into the importance of rangers and the role of rangers as well. I feel like I talk about this with most people on this podcast, but it's always great to get different people's perspectives because, as you said in this example, I mean, rangers, they really are frontline workers, and I think a lot of people forget that. So, like police or fire, they just happen to be in, these nature preserves or protected areas where wildlife is a big part of their job, but also they're interacting with, people that are on those reserves, but also the communities around them, and giving them skills that then impact the people they live with and around in that positive way. I think, I'm sure it gives them more pride personally, but also more respect within the community, more ways they can help. And they're not, like you said, just seen as someone that's maybe protecting someone else's nature while other people are suffering on the outside for whatever reason. But maybe you could go into, from your perspective, what a ranger is. I know that's kind of a basic thing, but what a ranger is and some of the roles they play and the importance of them. I feel like, that's a lot, but, and there's so many varied ways to go about it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's well. First of all, that sort of synopsis that you just gave there, I think, was spot on. Right, it really nailed it. I think, in essence, basically, a ranger is someone that takes care of a natural area, right? Which can be protected or not protected, doesn't even matter. That, in essence, that's what a ranger does, right? You guys have rangers in the US. Rangers are basically everywhere. What they actually do is depending on the local context. So you might find, if we just concentrated on Africa, you might find that in some areas, rangers do a lot of work with the community all the time because maybe it's a dual use land which is shared by community and wildlife. In Kenya, you get quite a few of those areas where you have cattle grazing right next to groups of elephants. The land is shared. The routes are shared. And then by definition, you have a lot of interaction with the communities, and that's where you get the goodwill, and that's where you keep on top of it. And you also find that a lot of these rangers are not even armed, and they often have like an armed response team, but sometimes these rangers are not even armed. Their job is to walk around, talk to people, keep an eye out, what's happening, where the animal's moving, where's the cattle, or anything going on. On the other side of the spectrum, the completely other end of the spectrum, you get areas that are highly contested, often bordering, I don't like the word, but maybe it paints the picture very quickly, bordering a failed state, for instance, right? We had to, basically in Kenya, we had that thing, 2012 was a big poaching surge in Kenya because on the Somali side of the Tsavos, where there was, no rule of law at the time, that's where people would come in, and they'd come across heavily armed, AK-47s, even heavier, people that know guns, PKMs, RPGs even, right? And they would come across, they would try to grab as much as they can. There was no skill about it. They would go into a herd of elephants, try to shoot as many as they could, get the ivory, run across the border, and then once they got across the border, they couldn't be touched. Right, so the escalation of force is so much higher because of that, because people can sort of go run across the line and they're sort of free. So everything between that actually exists, in Africa. Some protected areas are fenced, right? Some aren't. And then you have the whole plethora of things that rangers do, right? Aside from that, the law enforcement aspect of it, in some cases, paramilitary aspect of it, it's about knowing what happens in your protected area and responding to incidents, which can be a tourist that drives on an anthill and the wheels come off the ground and they're now stuck and people are looking for them, real life example. Or bushfires, the guys at Wildlife Works in 2016 did 173 bushfires in one year. So that was a bushfire year. But it's also about knowing what moves around your area, what invasive species there are, and they need to be controlled. It's game counts, it's transects, it's such a, and then your tourists, you guide your tourists around. Can be really anything. There's so many tasks that a ranger may be asked to do. I feel it's a lot more complex job than what we did in the military. The military was very simple. This is your job. You're part of this structure, and this is what you do. And when we need that skill, we're going to call you for it. Rangers do a lot of stuff. An animal that is not killed, that ivory or that rhino horn will not end up on the market. As simple as that. Generally, and I've seen this in multiple places in Africa, is once an area is protected well, within about 25 years, everything comes back, right? It comes back, and it can go from, a barren, featureless desert between exclamation mark, apostrophes, what are they called?
Quotations.
to a thriving ecosystem. With everything coming back, but it comes with good management and good protection of the area, and that's rangers that do it. Nobody else. To me, that's pretty darn important. Yeah,
it's really well put. And you think of all these areas that we want to protect as a world, and there has to be someone on the ground to do that, and that's the rangers. And like you said, there's so many different skills they have to have. Of course, some are specialized in certain ways for certain areas, but even the specialized rangers still have to have a lot of these skills. Dealing with people is always going to be a big part of it, whether that's tourists or communities. Yeah. And the life-saving skills that you guys are teaching in some of your courses apply to pretty much every part of life. Maybe you can go into some more detail about some of the skills that, maybe this could be interesting, some of the skills that you learned in the military that are now transferable to these courses. I don't know. I mean, the tracking, people might think of that as something that, either hunters use or, in the military, I could see the use of that when, you're in battle, but how do those apply out in the field as a ranger as well?
I think about 20% of what I learned in the military is applicable. I think most of it has to do with structure and systems and SOPs. Tracking is actually not something I need to bring to Africa. There's some guys there that are mind-blowing ninjas, like ridiculous. What we can bring is how, when you are a great tracker, how can you teach this to your peers, right? And so maybe we can help you to devise certain exercises or certain things that you can start teaching that more easily. And that goes for a lot of other skills as well. So being a tracker myself helps me to understand the importance of it for rangers, and it helps me to understand what they do when they do it, but they don't need me to teach it, genuinely. I was very fortunate that very early on when we started this, I had some really good mentors in the rangers, some of the rangers that I work with that were able to show me their job. And show me, okay, this is how you deal with this. This is how you deal with an elephant. This is how you deal with a buffalo. This is what it looks like. This is how we see the terrain as we move through it, right? But also, seeing an instance where, and this always happens around election time in Kenya, where, some local politician might promise people something in order to get elected, and that promise might be, you can have this land, right, which is not his to give. I've seen a situation where on the borderline of the protected area, there was about 40 to 50 police, Kenya Wildlife Service, and other rangers. And on the other side were 300 angry villagers with pangas, machetes, and axes. And it only needed this to kick off and become what you can imagine it can become. And then seeing a senior ranger, an old dude, step up and diffuse that entire situation, not by force, but by talking, by reasoning, by going out on a limb, right? That is also, that is, what we're like in the military, right? You meet force with force, easy. And they come with more, then you need bigger guns, right? That's sort of how that works. But seeing this awesome skill and the importance of it, I would say that on the work of ranging itself, let's call it ranging or being a ranger, I've learned more than that I brought, right? But then again, on the instruction side of things, on the SOP side of things, that's what we bring to the table, what we're very good at, and that combination is gold.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of my experience with rangers is in the South African context, but like you're saying, I feel like that's one of those skills that I'm always amazed by, is just like the ability for these men and women to be able to communicate. And because you think, they're out in the bush, they're doing a lot of this work, but then you realize, maybe it comes from a lot of this training that they've had and have had to give to others around them, but their ability to communicate not only with themselves in terms of the work they're doing, but with people, usually they're not the guides that are leading people through reserves, but I feel like most of them have that ability to take someone on a journey out in the bush and, explain the reason that this and this is happening, or, understand all the wildlife and be able to communicate that. And I'm just always like blown away by the wealth of knowledge that rangers have. So yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
What would you say makes a good ranger trainer? Because ultimately that's what you're developing, is people that can go back and train. What is a good ranger trainer?
Well, first of all, you need to know the subject that you're training, and you need to know it really well. And I think you need to know it better than if you were dealing with one specific demographic, because ranger work is so diverse, and the rangers that you are teaching are from such diverse backgrounds. So you need to know what you're doing, first of all. Second of all, I think you just need to be very good instructionally. You need to have multiple ways to get from A to B, right? So when you start your lesson, you keep your eye on the ball. I need to be there. How I'm going to get there, I don't know yet. The class will tell me how we get there, right? So that interaction is really important. So the more tools you have, the more metaphors you have, the more different little things that you can do to get there, the better. And yeah, you need to be a people person. I think you need to be able to connect to people. You need to be able to pick up when, someone needs something, whether they need more explanation or they need encouragement or they need something else. And you should not be afraid of a bit of hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's plenty of other things, but I think it's like with other things in life as well. I think, you need to have strong ethical standards and treat people like people. It's very easy. Like, one of the things in Africa, at least the areas that I worked, can become a thing is, things like tribalism, favoritism, nepotism, and that can really upset, a group or a team, right? So you got to treat everybody the same, right? That has to be in your core. It shouldn't be a trick. It should be who you are, right? Doesn't matter who's in front of you. It's a human being, and that's how you interact with them. And like all other people, pick it up very quickly if what you say and what you do are two different things.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's great. And I mean, I think implicit in a lot of that is the ability to listen. I mean, to connect with someone, you really need to be able to listen and observe what they need and what they're missing, and kind of put yourself in their place to then be able to translate that and figure out how, like you're saying, you get a class, you might have a way you're trying to teach them, but then if you're really in tune with them, you might realize that, oh, this isn't clicking because they're not getting this aspect. I need to shift the way I'm doing it. So yeah, there's really, I mean, those are, I guess, I don't know if you consider those soft skills, but just, really skills that don't seem obvious, I think, or easy to teach. But I feel like, what you guys have developed is really exciting, and that this thing can be sustainable in the way that it is, I think, is something that the world needs. So yeah. What are you guys looking at moving on in the future? I know you want to make yourselves obsolete, but anything that you're developing right now, any programs, are there plans to expand this, get more people involved?
Yes, all of that. And actually, it's the reason why I'm starting. I don't think you can see it on the camera, but my first gray hairs are starting to pop through.
I got mine years ago, so.
Yeah. Yeah, so we started moving. We started in East Africa, right? Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya. We're branching out quite a bit. Beginning of the year took us to as far as Ghana with my trainers, doing the training there. And we are also intensifying our collaboration with IAPF, who are already one of the organizations that collaborate on this. It seems now that before the end of 2024, we will have an additional 4 academies in Africa, one in Zimbabwe, one in Mozambique, one in Tanzania, one in Botswana. We already have one in Kenya. So, and all of those will have instructor staff from the country that need to be trained up and everything. So there's quite a bit of work ahead of us. But I think, again, these are some awesome opportunities. Collectively, those schools will be covering an area about the size of Ireland or bigger, which is, huge. So we have an opportunity to have an impact on really important landscapes within African conservation. Also very excited because we have the academies, we can do more at the same time. All of those academies, I haven't talked about this, but we have a reverse funding model. So all our training is paid for, basically. So we can partner up with organizations and say, look, if you guys promise us, in the MOU that you're going to employ these instructors or coaches that we're going to send back to you so that they can do what they need to do, then we'll train them for free. We'll train
awesome.
everybody up. So you can also reach organizations that are struggling with funding. But even organizations that have training funding, like, there's one organization in Kenya who, because we train their instructors and they now have in-house training, it dropped their training budget to 25% of what it was. And it was 150,000 a year. So that money can be used for other stuff that's really important. Yeah, and that's what I'm really excited about. So our team is growing as we speak, building the schools and doing all that. So lots of good stuff ahead of us.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really exciting. And this is kind of a question I threw at Ruben too, because his wife Marianne has been so involved in training rangers over the years as well. But for you, what's it been like working with Dominique in this space? I feel like she's pretty involved in lead as well, or what's kind of her path right now? How much do you guys work together?
Yeah, we set it up together, and that has been great. She's someone that, aside from being my partner, I really look up to her. She's an introvert, incredibly smart, and really knows what needs to be done. And she keeps me in check, It's something that I definitely need in that sense. Yeah, no, well, let me elaborate on that for just a second. When you come from the military, one of the skills that you learn is that you become very good on making decisions, far-reaching decision based on partial information, right? That is what a team leader does. Something happens, you gather information very quickly, you gain situational awareness, you decide, I know enough, and then you violently execute a plan to deal with it. When you leave, then I found out that I surged that time constraint, because that's my sweet spot. That's what I know. So even if there is no time limit at all, even if there's no time pressure, there's plenty of time to gain more information. I go, yeah, I know enough. Let's fucking do this. Apologies for swearing, but and then she would go, well,
maybe think through this a little more before we make a decision.
Yeah, I think it's true. And that's really what I learned from her. I mean, we still work together quite a lot, but she moved permanently over to the IAPF. She's now Director of Operations Africa for that organization. Absolutely nailing it. And every day I'm in awe of what she does. And we still work together quite a bit. So
that's really great.
Yeah, very, very, very lucky, very fortunate.
Yeah, I have to try to maybe get her on the podcast too.
Oh yes, yeah. I'll pitch it to her. Yeah.
So I feel like I ask a lot of people, what kind of advice would you give someone going into conservation? And maybe that could be part of it, but it would be interesting to hear from you. What would you tell someone that's maybe struggling a little bit? I don't know if you necessarily struggle to find your way. I might be just kind of presuming this, but it sounded like, when you decided to go to the military, it was kind of like, a path to maybe give you some structure or something like that, or get that energy out. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. I'm just kind of trying to come to something, but for some,
no, you're right.
Giving advice to someone that maybe was kind of in a similar position, because from that position, you've been able to, advance in so many different ways through the skills you learned through the military, and now, doing this work that's giving back in many other ways to conservation and kind of the world at large. So, yeah, what kind of advice would you give someone that's maybe in a similar position you were in when you were younger?
I would say, take your time. Do the dirt time, right? Do the work. Find great mentors and listen to them. And with mentors, I mean, the likes of Ruben, who will be the first person to tell you about the great mentors that he had at his time, and the people that he worked in his time. But do the groundwork, find great mentors, and take it serious when you do it, because these men and women deserve the best that we can bring to the table. If you do it for a giggle or, for a bit of adventure, have a look in the mirror, think about whether this is the best place to go. But if you're serious about it, then that would be my advice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of glory in it, as much as it might seem like it on the outside sometimes. But it's, from everyone I've talked with and in the space, it's a lot of hard work to do anything in the conservation.
Yeah, and some of the people, some of the people that you talk with on this podcast are definitely, a living example of it. But every once so often, it's bloody payday, mate. You're standing somewhere, you see the African sunset, and there's nothing like the African sunset. And you're, 20 meters away from elephants who come to drink at a water hole. Nothing around you, and that's payday. Or sitting around a campfire with a group of rangers who sharing stories, and no cell phones, no nothing like that. It's just bush TV and the fire and that, and then that's payday, and that is makes it worth.
Yeah, absolutely. Between the beautiful nature and probably some of the most amazing people you ever meet, for sure. I mean, that's been my experience. How can people get involved and learn more about Lead Ranger, help out in some way? What can people do?
Well, we have some information on our website, leadranger.org. It's not a lot. We also don't spend a lot of time on social media just for the sole reason that we want to be out there doing that bit of work. But if people want to support what we're doing, the best way is either through the Thin Green Line Foundation or the International Anti-Poaching Foundation. Those are the two. That's mom and dad, I would say, of this program. And by supporting them, you directly support what we're doing on the ground.
Yeah, that's really great. Well, yeah, Boris, this has been an amazing conversation. It's been so great getting to know you more and your story and learn more about what you're doing with Lead Ranger. I feel like it's some of my favorite work that's going on in the space, for sure. So it's been an honor to have you on here.
Oh, thank you very much, John. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the Rhino Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're excited to see the film succeed, please subscribe and review our podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Rhino Man the Movie. More details about Rhino Man, the social impact campaign, and future screenings are at rhinomanthemovie.org. To learn more about the Global Conservation Corps and their work, visit globalconservationcorps.org. Sign up for the newsletter and follow GCC on all of the social platforms. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe and catch up on GCC's Voices of Nature podcast, where Bob Ludke interviews a wide range of people who have dedicated their lives to making a difference in conservation. A special thanks goes out to Simone Wilson for the music for this podcast. He's the brilliant composer for Rhino Man the Movie. Learn more about his work at simonewilsonmusic.com. Until next time, I'm John Jerko, and this is the Rhino Man Podcast.